Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Wake Up Missoula. I'm your host, Scott Ramf, here to usher you in. It is January 23rd. A lot of things happening in and around the world today and beyond. While the city of Missoula is talking about the Unified Development Code, they'll be talking about even more this next week. I believe that from what they've been talking about in terms of amendments and changes they've been doing in terms of any kind of major changes to the Unified Development Code, if anything, it's more like crossing the T's and dotting the I's and everything like that when it comes to just creating a guardrails and a formula to make it easier for development to decide whether or not what they can build and how big they can build it. So a big part of this meeting is essentially talking about the amendments and talking about things they want to kind of alter and change to better fit the filling in a lot of the gaps that were kind of missed by the staff, because essentially the staff have been writing this for the last year or so to become more in compliance with the state law, and now the city council get a chance to comb over it and add some of their own elements to it as well. So this is part of the Land Use and Planning Committee. Spent the lion's share of Wednesday's meeting talking about UDC and trying to incorporate this plan with the greater Up Missoula growth policies. This is more of the same, but iron out some of the past, the technical details until the final vote on Monday, which at this point, from what this meeting kind of will show you, is that they still haven't really cleared and combed over every single detail, so they might end up going back to committee for the next week or so just to decide what's happening. So this isn't over yet. So during open public comments, citizens brought up some land that is zoned improperly, and Jane Darnell about the Ben Hughes neighborhood talks a little bit more to help kick us off for this next meeting.
The commuter trail identified as an amenity for our neighborhood. The walkway behind Cobblestone has been assigned as a commuter trail amenity to the Ben Hughes neighborhood. This is at best a short walkway and does not meet the definition of a commuter trail on several levels, but maybe most importantly because it does not connect to any other trail or trail system and has not done so for 40 years. Further, the condition of the walkway itself shows it has not been managed to support potential commuter use for year-round commuting. The environmental constraints includes steep banks and riverbank erosion, makes it highly doubtful such a trail could be constructed. Simply correcting this mistake by removing the commuter trail amenity designation of this walkway does not require further analysis or reanalysis of the amenity-based planning approach for the rest of the city. We've studied the maps provided and we see no other example of this type of situation when commuting has never occurred and could not occur without significant trail acquisition and construction to connect to a trail system.
At the same time, the big part of the issue with this is off of Highway 200, just east of Missoula, as you go into the community of East Missoula, where they were going to get that $24 million grant to work on the underpass underneath I-90 and the railroad itself. It was going to be a major overhaul project, but then that money got dodged. If you look at the map, it is very small area sandwiched between the mountains on one side and the river close by, with the railroad putting it into a thin neighborhood, open for bigger development than they can actually handle. So this is just one of the many things that people are bringing up, because you never know what's going to fall between the cracks, especially on more of those areas where it's still within the city limits, but still on the fringes. So the fringes are going to be a big, important factor to substantial growth in the city of Missoula. Heather Lynch, Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation, talks about residential potential at the fort, and this is what she had to say.
Residential development at Fort Missoula does not and will not meet the methodology or metrics outlined within the land use plan. There are approximately 150 acres of land within the civic district. About 58 acres has perpetual deed restrictions that prohibit their use for anything outside of their deeded intentions, meaning over 1/3 of the civic district is not currently, nor will ever be, available for residential development. The remaining parcels, when originally conveyed to non-federal entities by the U.S. Army, came with 20-year deed restrictions, limiting their sale and uses. The National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 sets this precedent, as the federal government conveys historic properties and lands with preservation and stewardship as a core tenet. This precedent is a good indicator that current federally owned parcels within the historic district will also have similar restrictions if those parcels are ever conveyed or sold.
All right. Much of the post-hospital development attempts, this area is a major decline with amenities, lacking in overall road maintenance, non-existent. While many buildings are protected by this historic overlay, it also was government military surplus with restrictions in place. If anything, the post-hospital is more or less a money pit with more barriers than permitting options. Of course, Max Wolf, the developer for that particular site, chimes in on this particular topic.
Overlays that were put in place to protect our historic districts and then say we are only going to continue to protecting one historic district area because it's more significant. As seen in the Federal Register of Historic Districts, all hold the same amount of historical significance, and it's up to our local regulations on how we protect them. Our new UDC pretty much says that all of Missoula's historic districts don't need protection except for one, Fort Missoula, adding further regulation to only 4 private landowners, while the rest of Missoula's historic districts, approximately 1,200 properties, have no design or historic regulation.
All right. So the whole idea is that Max Wolf is pointing out the fact that the city of Missoula is playing favorites with Fort Missoula. He calls for the immediate removal with design review being the only means to restrict rather than protect those 4 properties off Fort Missoula. Overall, Fort Missoula property is not zoned for residential as a whole, and while the historic overlay might be the main obstacle, in many discussions that followed, many city council members said that they should have more protections for historic buildings in the end. Matt Lotzenheiser, director of Historic Museum at Fort Missoula, responds to Wolf comments and adds some of his own.
The current historic overlay and protections granted by Missoula City Code made this possible. To remove the historic overlay would be to open the fort to development without any protections or guidelines. As we grapple with the erasure of history at the federal level, it's important that we remember the lessons history teaches us and present honest truths, not just elements of the past that make us feel good. Removing the historic overlay would effectively allow uncontrolled development on a sacred site for Japanese Americans. If the idea of allowing a Walmart on the National Mall or a town pump to be built on the grounds at Gettysburg feels inappropriate to you, then please know that removing the historic overlay and allowing uncontrolled development at Fort Missoula would mean the same for the Japanese American community.
All right. And so that was some of the takeaway from this argument. We'll move on from this as we get deeper into this. This is a 7-hour meeting, and I'm just giving you the snippets of everything that happened. We had another topic of discussion, including storefront zoning. So this was kind of like one of the weird changes for commercial districts and other things in the city of Missoula, trying to figure out how we're going to make things more walkable. So that what they want to do is effectively eliminate the sidewalk, parking lot, essentially putting the parking lot between the sidewalk and the building. They want to put the building in the forefront, parking in the back, maybe on the side, but have a access for people off the sidewalk to get into the building. So Bob Giordano from Free Cycles is in favor of bringing commercial structures to the frontage property.
Human scale is lost when a store is set far back from the public sidewalk. That building next to the public sidewalk and the Main Street frontage needs to have an operable entrance and not be a blank wall. A building entrance can be creatively positioned so that it fronts the sidewalk and also serves a parking lot. The pedestrian realm needs to be the priority though. While windows can raise a heating bill, windows also lower electricity costs and we get to utilize natural light. The health of workers and customers improves with natural light. It's a joining of the public and the private that grows social and community bonds and makes us really strong. This plan is about the next many generations. We can do this, we can thrive. Let's not water down the last 3 years of work by removing important pedestrian standards in many of the mixed-use zones. These pedestrian standards will not harm business, will not harm the driving system. On the contrary, we all win when we are able to walk.
All right. Let's see. Part of this creates a means to get better access and encourages people to get off to get onto public transit and into their business of choice without walking through parking lots. Public comments subsided in the beginning to make way for all those amendments from the city of Missoula. And so Cassie Tripard, Community Planning, talks about FAR, otherwise known as floor area ratio, from residential to commercial areas. And so part of the amendments is trying to differentiate how much floor space is being used from residential development versus commercial development. So here's Cassie Tripard with Community Planning.
There is both a neighborhood commercial floor area ratio and a residential floor area ratio. There is a maximum size cap for neighborhood commercial that was increased. Neighborhood commercial floor area counts towards the residential floor area ratio. Dwelling units above neighborhood commercial are exempt from the residential floor area ratio and the neighborhood commercial floor area ratio. And neighborhood commercial counts towards residential floor area ratio, but not within the same building for those units that are above. It would just count towards the FAR in another building or to units to the side of the neighborhood commercial use.
Makes sense? Didn't think so. There's a lot of confusing things when it comes to this whole FAR thing, but you don't really get it either. But part of this amendment is that commercial residents have a lot more freedoms by developers to work with, because when the state law for zoning passed back in 2023, that a series of models of dwelling types to be used by developers, which open the door for higher density in commercial districts. Through the city efforts, zoning could adjust these requirements to match the neighborhood overlay, leaving transitional mixed use to deal with these larger projects in the thing. So probably more confusing than you need to know, but also Cassie Tripard mentions PROST and how one area on the north side are being rezoned. And so PROST is what how they're incorporating parks and open space.
And staff recommend amending the map to zone these parks OP1, open lands. And so there's one here on the north side near Scott Street, Shakespeare, Otis Street, and Rogers Street. There is another one south of Broadway on the river along sort of the trail near Russell Street. And then the third parks-related map amendment is, I think in the Wapakia, sorry, hard to say, park as well. And that would also go to OP1.
All right. So essentially these rezonings would open the door for more potential park and areas and stuff like that. These amendments are getting pretty technical, and from what the meeting covered was roughly 5 pages out of the 14 pages related to the UDC as a whole, and that was just for today. So it was quite a sluggish meeting. Part of the issue was presenting to council is that public hearings tend to bring new light and challenges that have already been addressed within the staff. If not, they'll have to go back to committee to hash things out even further, which it seems like they end up doing in the end. So Betsy Kraske, the city council, spoke about the typical heights of buildings, which for the most part don't really change as much.
I want to point out that constituents have consistently asked about affordable housing and what we're doing to provide that. And increasing housing supply is one of the most effective tools we have to improve affordable housing over time. Research shows that adding new housing, even market rate housing, relieves pressure across the broader market, which benefits middle and lower income folks. This aligns with our stated values and our long-term housing goals as a city. I still believe we're really looking forward, as was stated earlier, to the generations that are coming after us. And I really do believe that this slight increase to 1.4 will help us house our neighbors who make Missoula the city we all know and love.
All right. So that was Betty Kratzke talking a little bit more about that. And the unfortunate nature of the EDC tends to skew towards more moderate to limited changes in height. Base and overall space of development in many zoning areas, Missoula ignoring many traditional neighborhoods for undeveloped land for high density, much like we've seen in the Mullen area where Meridian Boulevard behind Reserve Street north of the river. Kraske wanted to use FAR to increase it to allow for 2 more dwelling units as opposed to the 12 to 13 dwelling units allowed on the portions of Missoula which uses FAR, which, floor ratio, if you make it use the whole lot of the land, you can get more things like that. But yes, you're right. This is a lot of information, but it seems like these zoning options have been flexible in the meetings, housing stock demands, and pinpointing the right locations have been difficult since you kind of expect the city to comb over every square inch of the city without maps provided by the staff. Gwen Jones, City Council, responds to the city passed amendment after they move forward with allowing for more things with that.
In talking with people from the design community, it sounds like, for reasons too complicated to explain, but that are valuable, if we're at 1.4, there is a potential for saving more units, more existing units, I'll put it that way, that are either remodeled interior and then there's more added onto the lot. It makes it easier to save some existing housing while creating more density, which I think is good in terms of climate and all sorts of things. But I'm not going to raise any heights today. I'm letting you know right now. Not going there.
Yep. That seems to be a pretty prevailing thing with a lot of the constituents that are in contact with the city of Missoula. Is it seems like people are so afraid of just having one more layer up which would solve a lot of those issues in terms of density. But at the same time, that's what kind of brings it back to the whole, like, we're not making changes, we're literally just making more rules to the development code. So she also mentioned that developers are no longer focusing on those fourplexes moving forward, and new designers have been more incorporated. You know, far be it from me, basically a good example would be the Sawmill District and the kind of designs they want to start building in most places in Missoula. Benjamin Brewer, Community Planning, talks about these areas most affected by density.
This slide shows just the mixed-use place types that were approved in last December of 2024. The designation of mixed use somewhat expands the potential for commercial use into more areas than the previous growth policy plan by filling in some of the gaps along our already established corridors. That means more opportunity for commercial and mixed uses closer to where residents live. But it also means we should give consideration to transition for mixed use into those areas.
All right. And if you actually take a good look at this map, you know, here's Missoula essentially. Here we are in the downtown area with the dark purple. And then as we get further down into this kind of area right here, this is where you see a lot of those Brook Street corridor type things, you know, 93, all those business. Midtown master plan is a lot of big things happening in that particular area. Looking to see all sorts of interesting designs, and there are a lot of in-betweens the city is trying to essentially exploit to see if they can build high density but also transitional mixed use, which basically means they don't want to build a huge complex, they want to build a complex that's big enough that doesn't take away from the aesthetic of the neighborhood. That's basically what it is. I mean, I expect to be place types, and also Ben Brewer also provides an insight to what kind of development the city is actually favoring, and actually has pictures of the building types that they want to see from, you know, two different kind of traditional types of neighborhoods.
Try to make clear that the adopted land use policy states goals towards growing more urban. So we also, want to raise the concern that at a certain point, removing mixed use standards could lead to needing to reevaluate or possibly amend the land use plan. And one other related point that we would like to make is that the new code exempts additions to existing buildings from having to meet build to zones and build to width requirements. This is in the interest of promoting climate and sustainability goals to be able to continue to use buildings that exist already. The main takeaway with this rule is that once a building exists, it's not easily moved, relocated, or brought forward to meet the other goals of the plan, like walkability. Visions set by the land use plan and the associated neighborhood plans will be less achievable if we hold off on applying build to requirements in all of the urban mixed use zones.
All right. So yeah, I mean, the takeaway is a lot of staff are recommending a lot of those kind of big changes that a lot of the city with these amendments are being like, hey, walkability is in the name of the game, and many council members took time to get a clear image of how zoning encourages buildings to be up front rather than having a large parking lot in between sidewalks. Mirtha Becerra, City Council, talks about how this essentially looks.
Walkability of a neighborhood has less to do, in my opinion, with where the entrance is and more with how you get to it. A neighborhood is not walkable if the only way to get to that grocery store is by driving. But it is walkable if it has a connected network of sidewalks and bike lanes. So, for those reasons, I'm leaning towards supporting this amendment because I think we need to balance the design design excellence elements, orientation, and that pedestrian scale design with the actual walkability infrastructure.
All right. So that was Mirtha talking a little bit more about that. And so a lot of the time in terms of like Midtown master plan, if we look at this picture once again, I think the idea is that they're trying to make more urban commercial development where it gets close to Brook Street and to help essentially funnel some of the traffic to essentially have a kind of like while making things more walkable, you also make traffic a little bit more sensible when it comes to these kind of things. So traffic does slow down in those areas where things are a little bit squished together, very much like the hip strip, which we have a lot of the storefronts at the beginning, in the front where a lot of people are walkable, and they call it the hip strip for a reason because it's a lot more people are wandering around and checking things out, and they want to create that kind of zoning area when it comes to the Midtown Master Plan for Brook Street, just past Rose Park. But unless there is major change, we'll be stuck with baby stepping every zoning review to slowly get bigger with large projects and other projects continuing and very little substantial changes based on the best wishes of the future community, based on the best wishes of our current community. See what I mean? Nathan McLeod, Parks and Rec, tells a story about shows favorability towards urban standard development, and this is Nathan McLeod talking about. Oh, wait, hold on. Did I skip one? No, we're going to skip to Nathan McLeod. Here we go.
I want to share a really quick story that I think will illustrate what you're getting to, I think. I went to Costco the other day to get new tires for my truck, and instead of sitting in Costco and just watching everybody walk by, I decided to walk down the street to go to Buffalo Wild Wings and get some chicken wings. And I was thinking about all this stuff while I was walking along Reserve Street. And it's interesting because Reserve Street has all the infrastructure that we need for it to be walkable. It's got sidewalks, it's got trees, it's got green space, it's got bike lanes, but it was one of the most uncomfortable places that I can think of walking with our entire community. And I think that illustrates the fact that it's the private development adjacent to that street that really makes the street feel more walkable. It's not just the fact that there's a sidewalk there that you can physically walk along the street, but it's the feeling of walking along that street. It's having the buildings close to the street, so you have something to look at when you're walking down besides just feeling like you might get run over by a car from both sides. So I just wanted to share that. I think that's the experience that could be created if we don't think about these things within our mixed-use districts.
And perhaps maybe that would be the big solution for the Montana Department of Transportation's solution to all the major accidents that happen off Reserve Street, which are highly statistically more dangerous than any other street in the state of Montana. 4 to 5 intersections being Reserve Street for most dangerous in the city of Missoula. It's ridiculous. It's kind of crazy. But Reserve is a nightmare. I don't want to go into it because it's always been a nightmare. It's terrible. But regardless of that, this was only the first half of the Land Use and Planning Committee meeting. So I have a whole nother second half for you guys, but we're going to this is more of touching on more of the green spaces and stuff like that, and to kind of rehash some of the things back and forth. We're also going to talk about some of the things in terms of, some more, let's see how Eric Melson from City Council talks about how a lot of these amendments, a lot of these kind of posturings and a lot of things where we're trying to improve and have higher density of housing, we're kind of losing the message when it comes to a greener, more livable climate. So here's Eric Melson, City Council, talking about this.
For me, the reduction in landscaping at the expense of housing, it doesn't make sense. It's such a low cost barrier to developers. I mean, it is the cheapest line item in their development stack. And I just really reject the idea that cutting 5% here, cutting 10% here will make an appreciable change to the amount of units that go on the ground. And, to speak to the gentleman that was just up here, we're creating awkward patches of grass. That's the mentality, is that these are awkward patches of grass. Well, if you live in that development, that awkward patch of grass might be where you take your dog to go to the bathroom. It might be where you take a beach towel to go lay out on a small piece of grass in the concrete jungle that you reside in.
All right, so Eric Melson is definitely against any kind of amendment that would allow for more density in lieu of losing some of the additional land. One could say this argument is against FAR, but in many ways the city in the past and even today has conceded many smaller things that could snowball into the concrete jungle people fear and the urban sprawl that's a big prevalent thing in a growing city. But the same example is that the children are the future and they need a place to sleep. Then again, Nathan McLeod with PROST talks about some of those landscaping agreements, and one of those things is PROST is one of the new things that the city is making in to help encourage more green spaces for a lot of these larger developments that are happening.
So we've looked at pollinator gardens because in the land use plan, that's a goal, is to have more pollinator habitat in the city. So we've incentivized the idea if you build a pollinator garden, you could reduce your overall landscaping requirements by 30%. Same thing for native prairies, thinking about native plants, again, habitat space. We looked at trying to include green stormwater infrastructure, so bioswales or rain gardens that would actually pre-treat that stormwater runoff before it enters the sump. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get there with our standards and the code reform timeline, but it is something that we've looked at trying to do for the phase 2 to incorporate those standards and those incentives and reductions. Unfortunately, I don't think that we would be able to incentivize that kind of thing if we go ahead and cut the requirements down to the very bare minimum, and then we can't require less after we go to the bare minimum, if that makes sense.
All right, so as we get further into this meeting, as someone who lives in neighborhoods that battles trees, boulevards, it's hard to balance having trees in many areas that with sidewalks nearby because the sidewalks are man-made, and while nature is ever closer to Missoula as a whole, and the some parts, which include those pocket parks the city doesn't manage, it's hard to find that good balance. So Jennifer Savage, City Council, reflects on that balance.
3 things have choked development in Missoula. Well, 4 things. Setbacks, parking requirements, landscaping, and not being able to get a permit quickly. So that's what I keep hearing. I've heard it over and over and over again the entire time that I've been on council. And so for me, I am actually more interested in number 6, which is looking at the planning board's recommendations and kind of looking at it holistically. But I do offer that out there because I do feel like with every spot zone, with every decrease in height, with every down zone of every single parcel, we are getting less housing.
All right. And part of the solutions to reduction in parks is the concept of cash in lieu. And what they want to do is that the UDC is going to protect the city's bottom line with some little density pockets here and there. And many citizens and people on council are in agreement that the subtle growth to an area, ever-growing city, not able to meet the demands of housing, well, that's on the back of many local leaders' minds, creating in cash in lieu with developers to reduce green spaces for more housing, talks about the generated money from this particular program. Nathan McLeod from Open Space talks about this cash in lieu for essentially, this is like what they do with urban renewal district. They have park districts for these kind of developments in which if a developer doesn't develop a park, some of the money from the taxes of this area are generated, hence cash in lieu, to go towards parks and green spaces elsewhere as a whole, rather than it just being a part of the green spaces. So this is what Nathan McLeod says.
Developer gets an appraisal, and that appraisal has to be within 6 months of the filing of the final plat, and they set the value for cash in lieu based on that appraisal. And in communications with the development community, they didn't like that process. It was cumbersome. They didn't know what it was going to be. It was unpredictable. And so we actually created this standard for subdivisions based on feedback we heard. People wanted to just have the city tell us what it's going to be so we can tell our clients this is what it's going to be. And so we decided to try to apply that same methodology to the cash in lieu of activity area.
And what that essentially means is that once they officially have a plan for this, they'll essentially have a framework for developers to look at and be like, oh, so this is the appraisal of this open space land, so I don't have to go through this whole 6-month process because time is money. The idea of this city open space to assign value to undeveloped land so developers can use these tools to understand the value rather than relying on the appraisal. In most cases, developers pay $1,500 to $2,000 and wait to know how much their undeveloped land would be to develop. They want to match the Bozeman model, which is essentially $2.75 per square foot, with some areas like downtown could be as high as $40 per square foot, and want to use the cash in lieu to add a layer of predictability for developers. Nathan McLeod, through the Open Space Department, also talks about requiring green spaces, and we have this as our last comment of my city council report.
We also recommend 10.68 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. In our densest urban areas, we know that we are in a deficit for a number of parks and availability of parks. We also have a goal that describes a park is creating a complete park experience, and that's essentially recognizing that a lot of our existing parks don't actually have amenities that are needed to support the types of activities and recreational use that we expect and that residents expect. It's either because those amenities were never built or because the infrastructure is aging and needs to be replaced. And so I think thinking about all of those things, and if we take your amendment as it's written, I wonder, do we want to start to think about the carrying capacity of those parks? What are the amenities that are actually existing within those parks? So for example, as it's written, somebody could not provide activity area because they're within half a mile of a 0.02 acre piece of grass that's next, that's essentially excess right of way because we've defined it as a pocket park. So I just think those are things that we need to think through with this. Is that the intent, right?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. I'll answer your question. It's because the state legislature basically said we can't do impact fees for parks anymore. And whether I disagree with that or not, that is something that they said. And it feels like one of the reasons they said it is because communities like Missoula have park districts where we, in addition to the general fund collected on properties, we have a park district. So this apartment complex is going to become a more higher taxable value than whatever was there before, which means the park district is going to go up.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, it does make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. Just because some areas don't win on the green front doesn't mean that there's not opportunity to use the money generated from that tax base to build better parks someplace else, maybe even close by. And, you know, Mike Nugent really nailed it on this one. And we kind of build up our community as we build up taxes in certain districts, and much like roads and urban renewal, those taxes are marked for park maintenance, expansion, and leverage for developers to use cash in to help pay for parks. I'm reluctant to use the word TIF because, you know, it's the idea that is a tool that has been using commercially generated urban renewal district for a lot of properties in the commercial areas to help raise money, to help leverage for redevelopment of certain sites, to help build these kind of potentially green spaces, more boulevards, street trees, sidewalks, basic infrastructure. And, you know, it's essentially reusing taxpayer money to reinvest in our city. But, you know, that's the thing about this kind of things is that, you know, regardless of what happens, the whole idea behind this is that it really feels like moderate Missoula is at it again, and a lot of talking about things that have slight increases over the next 5-year periods and forcing larger developments into non-incorporated towns on the fringes of Missoula, not just East Missoula, but many of those outlier communities having to take the brunt of higher density because they don't have the kind of zoning predictability that the city of Missoula has been building up until this point. And, you know, thus concludes my city council report of this particular thing so far. And we're going to have some more talking about this next week, since the city will be adamantly more so talking about the UDC. And I doubt they're going to be able to finish it on Monday, which they desired to do. So we might have another land use and planning committee next Wednesday to talk further about this. But pretty much I pretty much hit most of the things that they were talking about, some added things, but it really seems like they're baby stepping, slightly larger development, exploiting some of the more transitional mixed-use areas, but most of all, the fringes and more of those large development areas. If you haven't read the Missoula Current, just the last day or so, they just announced that they're looking to get some more federal funding for the, I want to say, George Elmer and the Mullen Build project. They're looking to get another $18 million of federal money for infrastructure improvements in that area to add thousands of new homes. And so Ward 2 is definitely one of the fastest growing areas, and that's honestly the only places that are going to be able to build in those kind of larger volumes of area compared to the vast majority of Missoula. We barely even scratched the surface when it comes to the Midtown Master Plan. Heck, phase 2 of Railroad Park is just kind of getting started with deconstruction off of Johnson Street where they used to have the shelter, and now they're looking to demolish some of those buildings and areas and redevelop that whole entire area pretty soon. So they have half of it being that Railroad Park, and now they're on phase 2, which is the removal of Johnson Street shelter. So in terms of any kind of major development, you know, you can just look into the Mullen area. That's where any kind of major changes are happening in the city of Missoula, and it's kind of been that way since the 90s. It's kind of ridiculous that most of the areas of Missoula have not been touched. Heck, even the Midtown Master Plan still hasn't bared any fruit, any changes besides that Railroad Park. So that's just something that's kind of happening going on here. I want to kind of end with that little rant. So I'm going to bring it on over to some new programs that are going to be airing on MCAT. Here is a bunch of new programs on MCAT from City Club and beyond.
We have a little bit of a dilemma on our hands in Missoula. We have this really high quality of life. And communities like us that have this high quality of life that's driven from natural amenities around us, who do not meet their growth challenges, can't remain affordable and inclusive. So that Venn diagram here, that's the example I have on the board, the intersection of these things doesn't exist. You have to choose two. So we as a community have chosen to have that high quality of life, but we've also chosen to aspire to remain affordable and inclusive. Now I say aspire because I think we all agree that we're not quite meeting that, right? Housing prices have gotten higher and higher. So the challenge is we're not quite keeping up with the growth.
They will actually create big networks of tunnels and channels that, again, can just completely change the way water is moving through the system. So all of this together is the idea of that beaver disturbance regime, and this is how they affect stream systems. So it's messiness, it's movement, it's forcing movement, it's keeping the stream connected to its floodplain, and it is leading to what I like to call the most biologically rich and diverse habitats in all of Montana. Some people would argue with me about that. I hope they do, because I love to have that argument. But I really think there's just nothing else out there that's like beaver colonies. There's nothing else that mimics this. There's no other wetland systems that look and act like beaver modified systems.
Regularly,
So-
it takes a village to run elections.
Right.
And this is where we say, hey, village, can you help us?
Yeah.
So we're recruiting election judges for the June election as well as the November election.
Gotcha.
And training is coming up in March. We hold training pretty early because we'll have an election in May for the school districts, and then June is here before you know it, so we
Yeah.
need to train people before the election cycle.
Is the training super rigorous? So somebody says, well, I'd love to sign up, but what's involved?
Yeah, so we have for what we call a basic election judge training. It's a paid training. So if you sign up to be an election judge, we like to call it paid public service.
Okay.
So you're paid at about minimum wage rate,
Yeah.
but you do get paid both for your training as well as your service on election day.
Well, some crazy movies that are coming out this weekend. We're kicking things off with Return to Silent Hill, which is a kind of like a remake of the Silent Hill 2 game. Hey, video game movies are coming out, and they're coming out in droves, and it's always a good sign when a horror movie comes out in January. But anyways, we're back to a town that is haunted by a mist from a game that's become popular for its unique style that has done to death with the mist to Alan Wake. Enjoy a series of, I never want to go back to that town, to we have to go back to the town to save someone close to me. Enjoy a town where the work dries up, the monsters get to work and on torturing the main characters and the townsfolk without plot armor. All right, then we got H is for Hawk. Welcome to yet another midlife crisis female movie where she takes on a weird hobby and learns to love herself while training this falcon or hawk to learn to listen to her complain about Brenda at work. Next time you're sad, try to feel your feelings and not replace it with fill in the void mindset. That's where alcoholism comes in, kids. Border 2, just when you think crossing the border is easy, yet another border crossing gets in the way, and this sequel is about a possible smuggling things and or people. So from what the synopsis wants me to believe, this is a Pak-Indian War of 1972, so war movies from India, so you can expect a lot of cheesy lines and special effects. Watch as the main guys smolder their way into our hearts. Then we got Dooba Dooba, where Numa Numa guy comes back for a horror film, you get Dooba Dooba. You can't really think of anything better, but hey, the Bye Bye Man was also a thing. Nothing like bringing back the security camera and nanny cam found footage horror film about some teenage girl being tortured by unseen forces until they are forced into confront it, and most likely lose because of the ongoing theme of found footage. Because when you have a found footage film, it's the idea is like, oh, you found the footage, and the people on the footage are probably not there anymore. Think about it. All right, then we got another movie called Clicka. Might as well be called 8 Mile again. If you have a one shop, what would you do? 8 Mile themed movie about a street hustler trying to make it in the music industry. Watches some guy goes viral and begins to capitalize on it as he navigates life in this Mexican-American trying to break through tropes you only hear about in the movies. And then finally, The Dream Cinderella. So imagine a film studio makes a movie about someone they claim will cause it to flop, like The Producer situation, but Latin American telenovela, talking about Cinderella and possibly having the director fall in love with her in the end. So this was meant to be a flop, but I'm falling in love with the flop in the first place. That's essentially what the movie can expect. So those are the movies that are coming out this weekend. I have a fun video from our Winter Days camp, and then hopefully I'll be back with our dub and stuff sometime next week or the week after. I wanted to take a little break from doing those. So here is Creature, a kind of an offshoot of Mr. Beast. So here is some of our kids from our Winter Days camp just last December.
Hey guys, welcome to our YouTube channel. Hi, we're gonna be breaking inside this house. So let's do it. Okay. Mr. Creature. You will go to jail.
Oh, that's gonna be way harder than you think.
Yo, dude, I think it's a snake. Okay, I'm tiny, just tiny. Oh, this is
Make sure you like and subscribe, and comment which one looks better, me or your mom.
I got a chance to speak with the kidnapper, and I asked him a bunch of questions. He said that he did the crime because some people broke into his house and kidnapped him.
He's on the way for a long time. Yeah! This way,
Sir, Mr. Gas Mask guy, how do you feel about being arrested?
I have a lot on my shoulders.
Also, what is your real name?
Larry.
Okay, so Mr. Larry, how do you feel?
Like I killed a lot of people.
This guy should do it.
What?
Do you feel guilty?
This guy should go to jail. No, none at all.
Good job. Did you make any deals with anybody to do this?
No.
So you just did this for the heck of it?
No, because people broke into my house.
Well, those people should have gone to jail.
I agree.
Do you know if they did go to jail?
They died.
I didn't. I think that's good enough of a punishment. Coming live on MCAT TV.
Shut up, prisoner.
Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. How are you? There's not going to be any more kidnappers kidnapping me, so I'm totally fine.
All right, we are back. Let's talk about some news that are happening in and around the world today. Kicking things off, of course, in Missoula Tuesday, we saw some of those northern lights. Boom. As you can see behind me, if you get a chance, Reddit's Missoula subreddit just posted a time lapse of the northern lights on Tuesday night. The key to get some of those great shots is an old camera and increase brightnesses on your photo to pick up what the naked eye could not quite see with the light pollution. And so that was from the south side of Missoula. And of course, looks like those mailers in Montana are getting some heat from being too partisan in the upcoming election. So this was an election pamphlet to guarantee that there's not going to be any election fraud, election integrity, and citizenry. Only citizens should be allowed to vote. Postcards plastered with the Secretary of State, Christy Jacobson, and a little politician you might know as Donald Trump. While Danes and Zinke have sent out physical postcards, they defended defended public lands. This was actually about using state funds to promote elections using the photos of the current president and talking about this kind of stuff. So part of this had to do with the fact that the claims Trump had made since 2020 election was about voting fraud. To this day, has not conceded that the 2020 election. Secretary of State spokesperson Richie Melby said last week that the mailer was intended to celebrate the new tool offered through a federal partnership called Systemic Alien Verification for Entitlements, or SAVE, which recently flagged 23 Montana voters as potential non-citizens. The Secretary of State's office tallied 784,949 registered voters in Montana as of Wednesday evening, meaning those flagged make up about 0.003% of registered voters. If a duck walks and talks like a duck, it's probably state-funded propaganda. The Bureau of Land Management also put an axe to bison grazing in Montana. So what kind of started out as a means to preserve a Native American culture through American Prairie, who have been permitted to have bison grazing on the federal public land since 2010. A deal dealt with some issues trying to renew their permit since 2019. The nonprofit conservation group will lose its right to graze bison on 7 plots of land in Phillips County. American Prairie has sought to reintroduce bison to parts of Montana, managing more than 500,000 acres in the state and owning about 167,000 acres. The nonprofit organization has nearly 1,000 head of bison across 46,000 acres and a mission to create one of the largest nature preserves in the country. It doesn't help when the governor of Montana pressured officials to deny the renewal and celebrated by saying, quote, "Today, decisions by BLM is a win for Montana's ranchers, our agriculture producers, and rule of law," Gianforte said in his statement. "For years, we have raised serious concerns about the federal government's failure to listen to the folks who live and work in the land by proposing to cancel these permits. BLM is finally acknowledging the federal overreach cannot come at the expense of our local communities and the production agriculture that feeds our nation. I am proud of our administration's work to achieve this decision, and I would like to thank Secretary of the Interior Doug Bergman and BLM for following the law and putting Montanans first." Ranchers in open space have had issues since the great expansion west, with open range cattle and private property growing more every day, with influences in businesses beyond cattle, but mineral extractions, and favoring people over the natural environment. Bottom line, money versus nonprofits. Speaking of versus, it seems like Minneapolis police are butting heads with ICE over many racial profiling of their own officers, even when off duty. What started with the shooting death of Renee Good broke out into protests and disruption of church services the other day in a very city where George Floyd met his end at the hands of law enforcement. However, local police are beginning to see the many cracks in ICE's attempts to do their job, which seems more or less hell-bent on snatching people without proof of citizenship, going into people's homes without a warrant. While this is happening, many sanctuary cities are worried about being targeted like Minneapolis. Missoula will be hosting our own protest this afternoon in solidarity with people in Minnesota at the Russell Smith Federal Courthouse at noon today, but also will be hosting a silent vigil on Sunday for that as well. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of things happening back and forth. You know, I'm only talking about the tidbits there, but we're also talking about some more people getting involved with politics, with Seth Bodner officially ending his time as president of the University of Montana, announced that he would be stepping down from his position to potentially pursue. Montana Free Press kind of broke it last week, saying that he's probably running as an independent with a more Democratic leaning, but losing the D just to kind of get more favorability for the folks, since he's going to be running against Steve Daines, the incumbent in the 2026 election. But however, there's still a lot of speculation around that as well. 8 years of leading the charge during the low enrollment and reputation tarnished by sexual assault investigations from the 2012 following Royce Engstrom's short tenure as president. He oversaw student numbers returning to the highest numbers in over a decade, and dealing with the budget cuts and the pandemic. Bodner arrived at the UM with his wife Chelsea and 3 kids. With more than 8 years ago, he described his tenure at the university as, quote, "the most meaningful professional experience of my life." UM was named the #1 university in the nation for community and national service and the most military-friendly university in the country. It didn't hurt that he was also himself a Green Beret. So while his time in Missoula might not be over, he aims to represent the state of Montana in an elected position in an area of Montana that doesn't get much respect from the greater Montana area. In terms of Montana, the Board of Regents will see who fills in the void left by Bodner's exit, as they are confident they are able to fill in the spot. You know what's not filling the spot of tourism? Canadians come to the United States, especially here in Montana. January marked the first of 11 months where tourism in the state dropped by 29%. So 29% less people from Canada visited the United States. And Why? Why was that happening? Because of tensions between the U.S. and Canada. It began last year with Trump threatening annexation of the country, and tariffs, and throughout the last year have made it difficult for trade, with numbers dipping down 21% of basic exports from the Montana-Canadian border. Data from the U.S. Bureau of Transportation Statistics indicates the full shipping containing crossing into Montana for the first 11 months fell by 21% from its 30-year peak in 2024. So mind you, 2020, the pandemic, things saw big drops. But this drop is a lot more substantial compared to any other drop despite the pandemic. And individual crossings drop into 29%, which is about 736,000 less people from Canada visiting through Montana. So there's a lot of numbers, and Missoula is looking, and the numbers visit every year are in the millions, whether that means Montana is at a pit stop or their intended location. Losing more than less than 750,000 people in tourism is definitely going to hit for sure. And even folks over at Big Sky were interviewed for Montana Free Press, expressing concerns that while other countries are increasing, their Canadian ski enthusiasts have dropped significant compared to any other types of tourism coming to Big Sky. But also, that's pretty much it in terms of just kind of news here and there like that. I did touch a little bit about the recent breaking news that the city of Missoula is looking to get some more infrastructure money through $18.4 million to extend George Elmer Drive to West Broadway, place a roundabout at Mary Jane and England Boulevards, and basically improve the infrastructure and continue the expansion of the Mullen Build project. So there's a lot of things happening there. The city and county master plan is working on the 1,500 acres years ago to help guide current and future growth, including thousands of new housing units. And while some infrastructure is in place, other phases of the projects remained unfinished. So they're looking to help finish that stuff for some more federal grants. So this is going to be round 2 of another $18 million going towards this. So looking forward to that. We do have a little bit more time, so we're going to talk about some events that are happening. Kicking off this morning, and most daily days from Monday through Friday, Stroller Strides Mommy and Me workout classes. Bring your kids in strollers to Bonner Park every weekday at 9:30 at Bonner Park. Little Clubs Playgroup at the Sports Barn starting at 10 a.m. In Power Place, open play area at the Missoula Food Bank at 10 a.m. Tiny Tales at the Missoula Public Library here every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Lunch at the Missoula Senior Center, if you're looking to get lunches there, that happen Monday through Friday. Pavarella Center has breakfast, lunch, and dinner daily, every single day, including Christmas. Yarns and Watercolor, Missoula Public Library at 12 noon every single Friday. The Bookmobile here at the Missoula Public Library will be visiting YWCA of Missoula at the Meadowlark starting at noon today. Minnesota, Solidarity Rally is going to be happening at the Russell Smith Federal Courthouse. This is off of Patty and Broadway, just a couple blocks down from the Missoula County Courthouse. And so they want to do, where all, an organization called for a mass strike on the day where all Minnesotans are asked for nonviolent moral action, reflection, no work except for emergency services, no school, no shopping, only community conscience and collective action. So this is going to be happening from noon to 1 p.m. today. All Abilities Art Club at base at 1 p.m. for folks living with disabilities. Friday night dinner and game night at Rooster Cafe off of Reserve Street, just off of Spurgeon, off those old gray strip mall areas. Winter fireside storytelling with Chris Latre at the Montana Natural History Center. So he just got wrapped up with the Montana Poet Laureate. And for millennia, Indigenous people have passed the winter telling stories. Some stories, particularly trickster stories, were allowed to be told only in winter, or when the land was covered with snow. The winter spent an evening with storyteller and the 11th Montana Poet Laureate, Chris Latre of the Little Shell Tribe and the Montana History Center, and dipping the toes in the fireside in this ancient intertribal tradition. Karaoke at the Jack Saloon at 7 p.m. You got Montana folklore folk dance at Missoula Elks Lodge. They have that quite a bit. It's going to be at 7 p.m. Ken Ludwig, Moon Over Buffalo, MCT's PG-13 play that's happening this weekend. Bear Bay Dance is doing a Kaleidoscope 13 throughout this weekend. The Come for the Film, Stay for the Popcorn, the 13th Annual International Screen Dance Film is now exploding in the West Side Theater stage. 10 dance films from across the world, in addition to live interdisciplinary performances created by Colorado-based multimedia and dance artist Janine McCain in her brand new collaboration with Bear Bay Dance Company. Moondogs is going to be at Old Post playing some folk music at the Old Post at 7:30 p.m. tonight. Appalachia bringing home to the Holler at Monk's playing some electronic music tonight at 9 p.m. We got Friday night dance party at the Sunrise Saloon. Bo Akimbo is playing at the Union Club to wrap up your Friday nights. And as we talk about some Saturday stuff as well, Lifelong Learning Center is doing Spanakopita is a delicious Greek pie with crispy folo dough layered on over savory spinach, onion, and feta filling. This is a cooking class at the Lifelong Learning Center. They have a bunch of classes there, and some of their cooking classes are one and done type of deal. So if you want to dip your toe into learning some stuff, it's the place to be. Makerspace walk-in hours. So this is for people who want to do some 3D printing, laser engraving, all sorts of fun things here at the Missoula Public Library every Saturday at 10 a.m. Here at the library as well, they're doing a beekeeping seminar, Introduction to Beekeeping, on the 4th floor on the Missoula Public Library at 10 a.m. on the 4th floor. Then we got preschool playgroup at Rooster Acres Sports Center, indoor fun as it's cold outside. It's going to be a cold weekend. Story time at Missoula Public Library at 10:30 on Saturday, every Saturday. They're also doing an afternoon version at 3 p.m. as well. They're doing a museum tour at the Missoula Art Museum at 11 a.m. Victorian Tea Party is going to be at 11 a.m. at 9 Mile Schoolhouse if you were willing to make the drive. Downtown Missoula is this historic walking tour starting at 11 a.m. This is an online walking tour, so you just hook up to your audio, your Bluetooth, and you can take a nice tour of downtown Missoula starting at 11 a.m. Mid-century furniture event, Missoula Used Furniture starting at 11 a.m. Terrarium building workshop at Karis Nurseries. They're teaching folks about building terrariums. It's an intro into greenhouses, because terrariums are just basically converting old fish tanks into plants sanctuaries, essentially. Women-led intro to plumbing. Home Resource Community Room. This Home Resources does a bunch of women-led things where women can get more self-sufficient into basic construction and basic things, maintenance, and they're doing an intro to plumbing at noon on Saturday. And then MCAT Saturday drop-ins every Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. We do stop animation, do some fun short videos and stuff like that for the kids. D&D Guild for teens at the Missoula Public Library every Saturday at 3 p.m. We got Young Adult Winter Retreat at the Tamarack Grief Center. N7 game, Grizz basketball versus Idaho State at the Dogburg Arena in Missoula starting at 4 p.m. on Saturday. Bingo at Odd Pitch at 6 p.m. Bolts and Brews at Free Cycles. Mary Smith Jazz Group at the ZAC at 7:30 p.m. Vincent Atone Missoula playing electronic music at Monk's on Saturday at 8 p.m. Playing hockey at playing jazz at Stave and Hoop. Solid State Karaoke at Westside Lanes at 9 p.m. 406, playing some country music at Sunrise Saloon. Cash for Junkers at Union Club. Chris Moon at the Badland to wrap up your Saturday. And for Sunday, you got your typical Stitch and Bitch at the Space, a DIY studio at 12 noon. Five Valleys Accordion Dance Jam at Missoula Senior Center. Perfect Pour, Zootown Arts Community Center, which is a journey where pouring tea turns into an extraordinary adventure featuring puppetry, juggling, balancing acts, and delightful storytelling, and then a 1-hour show for our whole family. 2 p.m. noon on Sunday. Then we got Symphony for Kids at the Missoula Public Library. The Missoula Symphony invites families to a hands-on interactive music adventure starting at 2:30 in the afternoon on Sunday here at the Missoula Public Library on the 4th floor. Wild Women Archetypes, an experimental group club at Monroe Street Studio. This is at 4:30 p.m. The iconic Book Women Run with the Wolves by Dr. Clarissa Esty is on collection and curated stories from all around the world, all exploring wild women archetypes. They got MNFL Bingo at 5 p.m. at Tamarack on Sunday. Drams Tough Trivia at Dram Shop at 6 p.m. VFW is doing comedy at 8 p.m. and karaoke at the Sunrise Saloon. Thus wrapping up my show and beyond. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Take care. It is going to be an interesting weekend, and stay warm, everyone.